I was in the US recently on a book tour, and मुझे उड़ती खबर मिली है कि many of you guys are from or have lived in the US as well, right? How many have lived in the US or spent some time in the US? Okay, so question for you guys, that you're in the US, and I noticed this happened with me a lot, okay? And say you're sitting, you're having dinner, you're discussing Indian culture, etc., and the topic of Trump comes up, okay? How do you think that conversation will go? So, has anyone had conversations on Trump in the US? How does it go? What happens? Shouting, screaming. Yeah. It's one of the, and I'm not even an American. And frankly, I have no view on Trump. Why should I? I'm not voting on him. Right? But you can just sense the anger that just comes out. Either people who hate him or people who support him blindly, no matter what. Like I had, I've met people who are living in the US but are actually NRIs. So actually they haven't voted in the US elections. And even they were saying, no, he's not my president. Yeah, he's not your president. Your president is President Kovind. But the anger that comes out was like visceral. But it's not the only place where it happens. How many of you guys are on WhatsApp groups where our elders are part of the group? Any, your elders, your mosses, all of them, uncles, aunties. Every morning you get a good morning message, correct? And you have to reply back, because if you don't reply, what will happen? Another message. How can you forget me? What's wrong with you? What if the topic of politics comes up in that WhatsApp group? What happens? Better to be silent, right? And it's not just on politics. You go on Twitter, you go on Facebook, everywhere, there is this, you get this atmosphere of anger, of frustration everywhere. There's this book rather that was released recently called The Age of Anger. How many of you have heard of the book? It was actually a book talking about how in the modern day, there is anger all over the world, right? People are angry on so many issues. You see it on Twitter, you see it in drawing on conversation, you see it everywhere. There is this constant thing of, where are we going? What's happening to the world? Do you guys agree with that, or do you not agree with that? Everyone agrees with it. Yeah, I was hoping someone would not agree with it. Yeah, we're in the Heartfulness conversation. The thing with this conversation that always gets me is I don't understand why there is so much anger and frustration. Because humanity has actually never had it better. Never in our history. From when we emerged from Africa, humanity has never had it better. Never. Homo sapiens, our species. Right? Poverty on a per capita basis is the lowest it has ever been. Ever. Hunger on a per capita basis is the lowest it has ever been. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, their worry would be, I'll bloody starve to death. Do we worry about those issues now? Even in the poorest districts in India, the problem is not of hunger anymore. The problem is of malnutrition, right? Women have actually never had it better. I'm sorry, I know it might appear like I'm mansplaining, right? That's a correct word, right? Mansplaining? Yeah. But in terms of rights, in terms of security, there's still a long way to go. But history was far worse, especially the last 1,000 years for women. Small men like me, okay, or Raghav, or people who aren't physically strong, we've never had it better, right? Because earlier you had to be physically tough to protect yourself. If you made some money and you're carrying some money and you're traveling from one village to another, chances are you're not going to make it. In today's day, you can travel reasonably safely wherever you want to go. Humanity actually has never had it better. And yet, we are so angry. And yet, there's so much frustration. We are ripping Mother Nature apart. We are killing species at the level of an extinction level event. Humanity has never had it better, but other species are suffering almost like it's an extinction level event. Okay? Mother Nature is suffering hugely. We are ripping nature apart and we aren't even getting happiness out of it. What is going on? It's a very bizarre dichotomy. It's a very bizarre contradiction. In material terms, we are doing so well, but we are so unhappy. And it's almost like we don't have any toughness, emotional toughness. I'm not talking about intellectual. The kind of things our grandparents went through, kind of suffering that they went through, and the way they could just take it and carry on with life. हम लोग को थोड़ा सा problem हो जाता है and we start, oh, I'm suffering so much, what do I do? We've become emotionally so weak. We become psychologically so weak. Why is this happening? I have a theory, and that's what I want to put across to you, that a large part of the reason why this is happening is perhaps driven by our education system. in the ancient education system, the way it was designed, and I'm not just talking about India. Of course, I know a lot more of the Indian education system, because the ancient Indian education system, because I'm an Indian. But this was the way the education systems were across much of the ancient pagan world. The schools of mystery across the Mediterranean Ocean, the ancient Mediterranean Sea, the schools around the Southeast Asian areas. The logic used to be you have to find balance between your right brain and your left brain. Right? That was the way education was taught. So you have to learn capabilities, you have to learn skills, which the modern education system is very good at. Right? Engineering skills, math skills, stuff which will get you a good job. But stuff which you need to learn on how to live your life, techniques of how to live your life, which is stuff like philosophies, right? That's not taught as a standard part of the education system anymore. Anyone who's a philosophy graduate out here? No? Yeah, how sad. You know what happens? And in the ancient, sorry? In the ancient education system, everyone had to learn philosophy. There were two subjects everyone had to learn: mathematics and philosophy. Mathematics is the language of the gods. Philosophy is the technique of how to live your life. Those things are simply not taught to us anymore. We don't know how to live our lives. And it's not that we can ever reach an El Dorado where there will be no problems. That's not going to happen. No one lives a life like that. And that was the thing that our ancients used to teach us. Even gods never lived a life where they didn't have any problems. Everyone has problems. What's up to you is how you handle those problems, right? And that's what defines your emotional strength, your core. Problems are a part of life. How did our ancients teach it? I'm not going to go into the systems in the schools of mystery, etc. I'm going to talk about our ancient Gurukul, Pathshala, Madrasa systems. How did the ancients teach it? They used to teach it through stories. That was at the heart of training you to learn how to live. Because through stories, how many of you guys have studied in an IM or IM Ahmedabad? Anyone studied in IM Ahmedabad? It claims to be the best B school. The best B school is, we all know, IM Calcutta. But anyone studied in IM Ahmedabad? No. How do they teach out there? To the case study method, right? Everyone's heard of the case study method? Yeah? You have cases and you learn and apply them in your own life. That's how our stories were designed. We actually used to learn from the stories of our gods and try and apply them to our own life. Are you a compliant, law-abiding person? If yes, whose story should you look at? Lord Ram. Learn from the benefits of that way of life. Learn the challenges of that way of life. Do you want to be detached? Do you want to be cut off from the world? Do you think the world is not a good place to spend your time in? Who should you learn from? Lord Shiva is our Gautam Buddha. Okay, that's a suggestion I want to give. Do you want to balance contradictions? Okay, do you want to be detached and yet a householder? Do you want to practice yoga and yet smoke marijuana? You know? Now Shiva, right? There are case studies, we used to learn from them. Which is why in the ancient way, languages tell you something about the core culture of a society. In what our ancient language was Vedic Sanskrit, right? In Vedic Sanskrit, there's no translation for the English word blasphemy. What does blasphemy mean? Disrespectful to religion, to God, right? It's a very bad thing, like, how can you do blasphemy types? There was no translation for that word in Vedic Sanskrit. The concept didn't exist, so the word didn't exist. You know of the term judgment, right? Where someone judges you, you'll go to heaven, you'll go to hell, you are wrong. Did they have a word for this word, judgment, with this concept? Did they have a word for that in Vedic Sanskrit? Anyone wants to lay a guess? No, right? They didn't. Because you weren't supposed to judge, you weren't supposed to not question. You look at the stories of our gods and you learn and you apply it in your own life. That was the perspective with which our stories used to be approached. And then you get the strength and you get that role model. And then you think, if God could go through these challenges, who am I to say that I'm not going to face these challenges? Right? And if God could learn something from it and apply it in his own life, I'll look at him and I'll apply in my own life. And I will make sure then that this life is successful so that I'm better prepared for my next life. Or hopefully for moksha. I think that is something that perhaps we should try and put into our education system today. Sadly, the humanities streams You know, in most colleges today, even more so in the West, but sadly even in India, they're not really teaching you strength. There has, you know, it's almost like a cult of victimhood that has emerged. You know, that you just want to keep seeing how you're a victim. And if you actually search hard, everyone is a victim. If you search hard, look at your life, you can find a million ways to see yourself as a victim. But if you search hard and look at yourself, you'll find a million ways in which you're a winner as well. You might think that 1 billion people are better than you, but there are probably 6 billion people who are leading a worse life than you. It all depends on your approach. And that's core philosophy that can be taught, that how to build the emotional, psychological strength to manage problems that will come in any case. No one leads a life where there are no problems. And this is something perhaps we should try and put into our education system today. Then we can truly enjoy what our scientists and capitalism and the modern world has blessed us with. We've got blessings that two generations ago, couldn't even have dreamt of. Today, the middle class leads lifestyles that the royalty couldn't have lived 100 years ago. And yet we are unhappy. The fault is not in the world, the fault is in ourselves. The fault is in the way we are looking at ourselves. The fault is in the tools that we have not been taught, that we have not learned. And that's a thought I want to leave with you. Approach our stories, our ancient stories, with that perspective. Learn from them. And then try and apply that in your life. And that's what I try and do with my books as well. On the surface, it's a story. But through them, I'm trying to convey some philosophies which I think are useful for today. The reason I speak so much of our ancient culture is not because I'm trying to be jingoistic. I genuinely believe that we are among the luckiest peoples in the planet, those of us who live in the Indian subcontinent. We are inheritors of among the greatest treasures of wisdom that any bunch of ancestors could have left behind. And we are a bunch of morons because we don't understand any of it. Sadly, forget about understanding, we don't even explore so much of it. There's so much to be learned from there. And that's what I try and get across through my books. I'm deeply proud of what I think our ancestors have left us with. And I want to say one last thing. Our ancestors also left us with an attitude that jingoism is actually not in line with our traditional way of life. Our ancestors had an attitude that Saraswati Ma everyone knows who Saraswati Ma is, right? Anyone doesn't know? Thank God. Okay. She's the goddess of knowledge. Saraswati Ma, the goddess of knowledge, can bless anyone. Okay. She could bless an American, she could bless a Russian, she could bless an African, she could even bless a Pakistani. Okay. If you are genuinely smart and looking at your own selfish interest, learn it. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, where knowledge is coming from. Apply it in your own life. It's in your own selfish interest. And that was the attitude our ancestors had. They used to learn many things from others. We generated many things ourselves.